Appeal lost. The Little Sisters are ordered to violate their faith or pay massive IRS penalties. Deal struck. Congress now reviews an agreement with Iran on its nuclear program. The River Jordan. The UN weighing in on a debate involving the site where Jesus was baptized. And Game Changer. An ex-con masters a game, inspires filmmakers, and teaches others to make the right moves. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 14th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A U.S. appeals court rules today the Little Sisters of the Poor must comply with the government's HHS mandate. It forces religious ministries to violate their faith or pay massive IRS penalties. Mother Provincial of the Little Sisters of the Poor, Sister Lorraine Marie McGuire, says, "We simply cannot choose between our care for the elderly poor and our faith. We should not have to make that choice." She says the Little Sisters have been serving the neediest in society with love and dignity for 175 years. All they ask is to continue their religious vocation free from government intrusion. Adele Keim is with us from the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, representing the Little Sisters of the Poor as well as EWTN. So Adele, the Little Sisters won a reprieve a couple of years back from this mandate pending their appeal. What happened today, and does that change?
Well, the Supreme Court said 2 years ago that the government had to hit pause on the HHS mandate while the 10th Circuit considered the Little Sisters case. Today, the 10th Circuit ruled on that case and said they have to comply with the mandate.
So the judges in this appeals court say that the law, with the accommodation that has been made, they call it an exemption, doesn't burden the exercise of religion, does it?
It does. Brian, the 10th Circuit got it wrong on religious liberty, and it was just wrong about the mandate. It got it wrong on religious liberty because it told the nuns what to believe. Look, if there's a debate about what the Catholic faith requires, and the Little Sisters are on one side and federal judges on the others, my money is with the sisters every time.
You and many of the rest of us. So these IRS fines could cripple the Little Sisters financially. What do they do now? Are they going to be forced to close some of those beautiful homes that they operate?
The Little Sisters are committed to the people they serve. They're committed to keeping their homes open, whatever it takes. But they're also committed to fighting the mandate. So they're taking some time to pray, to reflect, to think about this, and to move forward.
People may not know, but they still beg to feed some of their residents. They call it that. They go out in a van and they go around to various vendors and ask for donations. Moving forward, how might this ruling affect not only the Little Sisters, but other faith-based organizations, including EWTN, which has a suit against the mandate?
Well, the fight's not over. Many observers expect the Supreme Court to take one of these cases and decide it by sometime next year. So you can expect to hear more about the mandate, and I know the Little Sisters are not going to remain silent.
Do you have any opinion on how the Supreme Court might look at this in light of the ruling of the appeals court today?
Well, we know that the Supreme Court has rebuked the government 6 times in a row over this outrageous HHS mandate, including as recently as just about 10 days ago in the case involving the Catholic Charities of Pennsylvania. So I think the Supreme Court is going to be taking a very close look at what the government's doing, and I'm hopeful that the Little Sisters will come out vindicated.
And we will be closely watching that decision. Adele Keim with the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. World powers finally strike a deal with Iran to curb its nuclear program. It gives Iran billions of dollars in relief from the international sanctions they were under. That deal already has many critics, as Wyatt Goolsby reports from the White House.
Brian, President Obama is starting a new campaign trying to sell this nuclear deal to skeptics at home and abroad. Critics hope Congress will reject the deal, so President Obama is off this week to try to meet with members of Congress and try to convince them to back the agreement. The president announced the landmark deal this morning.
Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon.
It comes after almost 2 years of negotiations between world powers and Iran. The deal could break decades of tension between Iran and the U.S. Today, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani calling it a new chapter for his nation. He says Iran never sought to build a nuclear bomb, but many U.S. lawmakers are skeptical.
I would say to the Iranians, we don't trust you with a large nuclear program because you lie and cheat. You've put every Arab state at risk. You've put Israel at risk. You've put our country at risk.
Graham joins a number of high-ranking GOP members who say this is a historically bad deal.
The deal that we have out there, in my view, from what I know of it thus far, is unacceptable. It's going to hand a dangerous regime billions of dollars in sanctions relief while paving the way for a nuclear Iran.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns Iran is not to be trusted. The Vatican, on the other hand, views the deal in a positive light, but the Holy See says the road ahead is critical. Continued efforts and commitment on the part of all involved will be necessary in order for it to bear fruit. President Obama will likely emphasize this week that if Iran breaks their end of the deal, the economic sanctions will snap back into place. He also assures the public that there will be, quote, very real consequences to a violation. Brian?
Thank you. Wyatt Goolsby at the White House. And Congress now has 60 days to study the deal and vote yay or nay or neither. Jason Calvi joins us with reaction from Capitol Hill.
Brian, Republicans are blasting the landmark deal, but even some of President Barack Obama's fellow Democrats are expressing skepticism.
This hearing will come to order.
Lawmakers took up the issue at a House hearing.
I personally, looking back at my 24 years of service in Congress, cannot think of a more consequential vote that each of you will cast in Congress for the future security of the United States.
So I will veto.
But if Congress votes to disapprove the deal, Obama says he'll veto it.
This is day one. He's already talking veto. If it's such a good deal, why not persuade Congress and, by extension, the American people about its contents?
Many questions from Democrats today.
Why do we believe that Iran's dangerous support for terror groups will change in 5 years, or that its desire for ballistic missile technology will wane in 8 years?
And concerns the deal would not allow inspectors to enter Iran anytime.
The deal, the way it works, takes nearly a month before you could ever get access to a site. That means the site can be cleaned up.
When it comes to a vote, all eyes will be on the Democrats to see if they'll support the plan brokered by the Obama administration or if they'll turn their back on the president. Many Democrats did just that on a recent issue involving trade authorities for presidents. Brian?
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. We'll have more analysis on that deal just a little later. Meanwhile, the Greek Prime Minister returns home with a bailout deal from the Eurozone that's much harsher than one that Greek voters have already rejected, and that is disappointing many in Greece.
All these reforms could happen 5 years ago, when people had some more money. Now we're dry.
I think we could do a lot better, but Eurozone isn't really helping us.
Eurogroup finance ministers are back at the negotiating table in Brussels. They're trying to figure out a bridge financing plan to help keep Greece afloat. Well, the escaped drug lord known as El Chapo is again Chicago's public enemy number one. The Chicago Crime Commission formally restored the title today. Joaquin Guzman first got the label in 2013 because his cartel dominates Chicago's drug trade. The only other public enemy number one was gangster Al Capone in the 1930s. Mexico's most powerful drug lord escaped from prison this past weekend. Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput affirms a Catholic school's decision to fire a gay teacher married to a same-sex partner. Archbishop Chaput said the nuns and board members who run Waldron Mercy Academy are simply following the church's teaching. He thanked school leaders for taking the steps to ensure that the Catholic faith is presented in accord with the teaching of the church, and that is a quote. The teacher was the school's religious instruction director. She claims she told the school about her same-sex marriage when she was hired 8 years ago. The UN's cultural agency wades into the debate about which side of the Jordan River was Jesus baptized. UNESCO now designates the east side in Jordan as a World Heritage Site. Israel and Jordan compete for tourism dollars that site generates. Jordan's tourism is down sharply since the 2011 Arab Spring and the rise of ISIS. Coming up, this group of Republican women is determined to close the GOP gender gap. And students at this New York school come from some of the most troubled countries around the world. A faith which does not draw us into solidarity is a faith which is dead. That's a quote from Pope Francis on a visit to a poor slum in Paraguay earlier this week. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. David Adesnik is the policy director for the Foreign Policy Initiative. That is a nonprofit promoting the U.S. engagement in diplomatic, economic, and military fronts. Back to the Iran deal, David. Is this deal good for the U.S.? Is it good for the world?
Well, I have to say I'm deeply concerned. We already knew after the April announcement of the agreed framework in Lausanne that almost all the restrictions on Iran's nuclear program would expire in 10 or perhaps 15 years. Now it may be even shorter than that, and we've also learned that in fact the inspections that are supposed to prevent Iran from developing a new covert nuclear program, inspectors may have to wait as much as 24 days to visit any suspect site. So the idea that this is a verifiable deal is really called into question.
The president seems to be trusting Iran quite a bit. Can Iran be trusted?
Well, the president is trusting Iran in practice, but what he always tells us when he speaks is that this deal is not about trust. It is absolutely a deal about verification. We're calling the old adage from President Reagan, trust but verify. And that's why the lack of tough inspections is such a big concern, that if on any minor issue the Iranians can invoke a sort of a deliberation and discussion process that lasts 24 days while they can clean up any evidence of what they've done, that's a real stumbling block.
And what if they should decide not to allow the inspections? What if they violate this accord in any way? Is there any recourse?
So 2 paragraphs in the accord do talk about a dispute resolution mechanism and creates a joint commission with representatives from all the countries. But the problem, not just that Iran is on that commission, but it's not really clear that it has any power to enforce anything it decides. That doesn't clearly spell out what happens. The only recourse it really suggests is that if someone isn't happy with a complaint, so if the U.S. says Iran is not complying, it can go to the UN and try to blow up the entire deal. So what you don't have is any sort of modulated enforcement. So from the smallest infringement to the largest one, the only way is to blow up the entire deal. There's no intermediate range that actually would suggest Iran needs to comply rather than just keep escalating until it gets what it wants.
One of the last sticking points was that Iran wanted the U.S. or the UN embargo, weapons embargo lifted. Did they get that?
Well, they got it after 5 years, and that's already a major concession from when the U.S. stood before. General Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, has warned vigorously against this. And of course, the reason for all this concern is that Iran is sponsoring both terrorist organizations, various militia and insurgents, and of course, brutal regimes like Assad as part of its effort to destabilize the Middle East and expand its influence. With perhaps upwards of $100 billion in oil revenue it's unlocked as part of this deal, 5 years from now, when that embargo is lifted, it means it has an open door to provide arms to all of those folks.
We know there's resistance in Congress. We heard the president say he'll veto if they don't pass it. Do they have enough votes to override a veto?
It's a tough challenge. So there's, the Republicans have a majority in both House, so there's almost an unquestionable majority for a resolution of disapproval. The question is, where do Democrats stand? And many of them have already expressed there's quite a bit of discomfort with the terms of this deal, but they're sort of between a rock and a hard place. I think they feel their constituents are unlikely to support this deal, and yet the power of a president and potentially of a presidential nominee like Hillary Clinton, if she supports the deal, would put them under tremendous pressure from the Democratic Party, which has a lot of resources that can control their future.
David Adesnik with the Foreign Policy Initiative. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, the 2012 presidential election produced the largest gender gap in Gallup's polling history. Today, GOP women give their take on what that party must do to close the divide. Catherine Szeltner has the story.
Brian, President Obama won female voters by 12% in the 2012 election. Today at Google's D.C. office, a company known for innovation, female conservative leaders say the GOP needs smarter messaging to break through that trend for 2016. Women leaders in Congress gathered this morning for a power brunch hosted by Google. Panelists included the youngest woman ever elected to Congress and a former fighter pilot. They say more women need to go into politics. Out of the current 247 House Republicans, only 22 are women. And the conservative leaders say women could decide the next election.
We are no longer a coalition or someone that should be sidelined. We are the majority. It's time that we step up and take our place. We decide who the elected officials are. We decide who those policymakers are that are going to be affecting our lives. We have that power, and we have those numbers to get things done.
Representative Wagner pointed out women are the fastest growing group in small businesses, and more women are graduating from college. She suggests more child tax credits and flex time so women can tackle busy schedules. 14 out of the 15 Republican presidential candidates are men. The female representatives had some campaign advice for them today. They said, don't paint Hillary Clinton as unintelligent or you will fail. Brian.
All right, Catherine Szeltner at the Google office here in D.C. Thank you. If you were ever the new kid in school, you may relate to this.
So that is to move yourself.
Starting a new school can be hard for any kid,
Let's look.
but doubly so when transferring from a country plagued with violent political instability.
There's killing people, innocent people. That's why my mom's saying there is no future of us. That's why we came here.
Zain Yunus and his 3 siblings left Karachi, Pakistan to escape a part of the world where Taliban gunmen have targeted schools. Their mother sought asylum in the United States last fall.
If you go to work in the morning, you don't know that you will be returning home by evening or no.
Similar stories can be found throughout the classroom. The students come from more than 30 countries, including Iraq, the Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and China.
Confidence is probably number one. It's something we focus a lot on, ensuring our students have the self-confidence to raise their hand in class, to participate.
The Refugee Youth Summer Academy aims to prepare young people for success in New York City public schools, starting with the importance of asking lots of questions.
To be an active participant, to question the teacher. That's not something that is necessarily common all over the world.
Also uncommon to many of these refugees, New York's multiculturalism.
I get the sense of how to work with other culture because in Nepal there is only Nepali people and we don't really work with other people.
Pasang Sherpa and her family fled Nepal after Maoist rebels took over their village. She went through the summer program a few years ago and is now a mentor to the kids.
I want to go back in Nepal in future and help other people.
Yunus will soon start 8th grade. He's already picked up an American attitude of optimism and patriotism.
New York City, Statue of Liberty, Empire State, and freedom.
Lessons learned beyond the classroom. Important lessons indeed. And after 2 restful weeks, Pope Emeritus Benedict returns to the Vatican. He's been staying at Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence near Rome. While there, he was awarded 2 honorary doctorates. His next event is the inauguration of the Joseph Ratzinger Benedict XVI Roman Library. This is the most active summer for the Pope Emeritus since stepping down in 2013. Up next, the Pope takes criticism for his anti-capitalist stance. How will he respond? And his transformed life inspired a film. His chessboard is changing lives. Meet Eugene Brown. On this 14th of July, we celebrate St. Kateri Tekakwitha, Lily of the Mohawks. Shunned by her tribe for converting to Catholicism, she was declared a saint by Pope Benedict XVI in 2012, who remarked on her virtue of chastity and a spirit of penance. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis may be catching up on some reading this week. During his return flight from South America, he was asked about criticism from U.S. conservatives of his anti-capitalist stance. The Holy Father responded asking for time to read up on that criticism, calling for dialogue with his critics before he visits here in September. The Pope often preaches against the injustices of today's, quote, structurally perverse global economic system that puts profit ahead of people. Good to welcome back Dr. Matthew Bunson, Faculty Chair for Catholic Distance University. And who are the Pope's critics and what are they arguing?
Yeah, well, most of the Pope's critics are, as unsurprisingly, are sort of on the conservative side, certainly in American politics. We've had a number of presidential candidates, in fact, place themselves as critics of this Pope, who feel that his criticism of capitalism is unwarranted or goes too far and does not acknowledge some of the immense good that the free market system has done around the world.
I'm sure arguments can be made on both sides.
Yeah.
And didn't the Holy Father indeed say that he wanted to talk
Well, that was so interesting about his flight back to Rome, because he, as you were just reading, just pointing out, the Holy Father is eager to engage his critics. But what is that going to require? It's going to require him to read their criticism. And he was very clear that he did not want to talk about their criticism until he had a chance to review it, to study it, and then, when he gets here, to have a dialogue with them. And it's a significant step, I think, for the Pope, especially as he begins his process of reaching out to American Catholics and to all segments of American life.
Matthew, let's consider the arguments.
Yeah.
Doesn't capitalism often put profit before people?
This has been a concern of the popes for a very long time in Catholic social thought. John Paul II was something of a critic of the capitalist system, as it has evidenced itself around the world. Benedict XVI, in his 2009 encyclical Caritas in Veritate, had criticism that was so withering that even at the time it raised many an eyebrow, and he had his critics. Pope Francis has built most of his criticisms on the very writings of Pope Benedict XVI. So this isn't something that's exclusively unique only to Pope Francis.
But isn't it true that free enterprise lifts millions out of poverty?
Yes. And it is absolutely true. In an interview with La Stampa earlier this year that was published in the Italian newspaper, Pope Francis was quoted as making note of the fact that the free enterprise system has indeed lifted millions out of poverty. But he also notes the important church teaching that we cannot, in trying to do that, institutionalize structures of sin in which we make money a greater priority than the human person, where we shed the dignity of the human person in pursuit of profit. That's been a fundamental concern for the popes really since the time of Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum, the dignity of the human person, but always remembering that they have to be at the heart, at the center of our economic system.
So he's not so much blasting capitalism as the perversion of it.
Yes. And we also have to remember that with Francis, the lived experience of capitalism, of the free enterprise system as he has seen it, at a time in the world when about 40% of the global population makes only about 5% of the global income. That's his personal encounter with the free market system, with free enterprise. And I think he's looking forward to learning more about it and to having that dialogue with American critics, American conservatives, and those who support, quite rightly, the great work that the free enterprise system has done around the world.
It'll be an interesting discussion. Dr. Matthew Bunson, Catholic Distance University, thanks for being back with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, in the film Life of a King, Academy Award winner Cuba Gooding Jr. plays a man transformed by the game of chess. That man is Eugene Brown, and our Mark Irons brings us his remarkable story tonight.
I equate my story to chess. There's an opening, there's a middle, and there's an end. So my opening started with a behavior problem.
That led Brown to make some bad choices, including robbing a bank. He spent 18 years in prison. Behind bars, Brown mastered chess.
Because it became a way of doing my time.
After his release, Brown started the Big Chair Chess Club with a big dream.
The biggest thing is to lift their consciousness, to let them know that they can achieve anything that's possible.
So he could have got a knight, he could have got a bishop.
Daniel Folks mentors kids at the club, but he started coming here when he was 6.
I watched some of the kids that I grew up with, you know, not really have anything to do, so they find stuff to get in trouble to do, you know. I'm glad I got introduced to chess when I did. It saved me from a lot of adverse situations.
Here at the Big Chair Chess Club, they have a motto: always think before you move. But that applies to more than just the game.
The think before you move really was spawned while I was in prison.
Among the lessons taught, discipline. A dropped chess piece means push-ups, even for the big kids. Looking back on his life, Eugene Brown is grateful.
I was lucky because I was able to develop in the end game.
And his goal is clear:
to save the lives of our children, to teach the unteachable, reach the unreachable, and always think before you move.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark. Life of a King. I'm going to put that movie on my list. And until tomorrow, we ask you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.